Hello and welcome to Week 2 Linear Regressions using Python. On our agenda for this week, we will learn how to read CSV files into our Python environment using a library called Pandas. We will get to know our data by exploring data frames. We'll run our first ordinary least squares regressions using Python and another library called Stats Models. And finally, we will learn how to save our results to files. Let's set the stage for our assignment this week. Our analysis this week is this. We've been given a data file, and this data file contains the smoking rates and lung cancer deaths per 100,000 people, age adjusted, for Canada. We have been tasked with researching the impact of smoking rates on lung cancer deaths. When smoking rates increase, what happens to lung cancer deaths? We're going to answer the question, is there a relationship between smoking rates and lung cancer deaths in Canada? How will we do this? First, we're going to need to read our CSV file into Python using the Pandas library. Next, we'll clean and restructure the data if necessary. Spoiler alert, this week we don't need to. We'll join the data file with other files if necessary. Again, we'll get to that in future weeks. This week we can skip steps 2 and 3. Then we'll run a correlation function to see if we have any variables that are linearly correlated with each other. And then finally, we will run a regression to see if we can support or refute our null hypothesis. We'll get to the nitty-gritty of the regression in the next video, but for now, let's get to know the data that we'll be working with. The data file that you've been provided is called table1_smoking versus cancer.csv. This file lists the Canadian smoking rates versus lung cancer deaths per 100,000 people, and this data has been age adjusted. Let's open up this file in Excel and see what it looks like. Our file contains data from 1990 to 2011 with a couple of gaps in the 90s. We have 5 columns: the year, the percentage of the population that are smokers, the percentage of male population that are smokers, percentage of female population which are smokers, and the age-adjusted lung cancer deaths per 100,000 people. These are all numbers, and we don't need to do any data cleaning. Recall that this is a CSV file, which means we don't have to open it in Excel. You can choose to open this file in Notepad if you're on Windows, or TextEdit if you're on a Mac. It's just text under the hood. Now, what if we wanted to know what the maximum and the minimum values in each of these columns are? Well, we can get Python to do that for us. So let's get this data into Python by making something called a data frame. What is a data frame? Think of it like a table. We have columns that have names, and then we have rows of data. And we can build these data frames in 2 ways. We can either build them by hand, by typing out the rows and columns in our code, or we can do things efficiently by getting Python to read in the data frame from disk, from our CSV file. And that's where Pandas comes in. Pandas is called the Python Data Analysis Library. Recall from Module 1 that Pandas is the library we will use to read CSV files. Because of that, it has a lot of power. In order to run our regression analysis or to read in our CSV files, Python doesn't know how to do that out of the box. So we need to do what's called importing libraries to add new capabilities to Python. In this case, we will use the Pandas library to read, write, and transform data for analysis in Python. Over the next 8 weeks, we're going to learn how to use this library to do most of our analysis. Let's start by reading a CSV file. To read a CSV file, we'll use a function called readCSV that's built into the Pandas library to read our CSV file from our project folder into a data frame. Let's hop over to Python and try that now. I'm back over in my Spider Python environment, and I'm ready to import my CSV file. The first line I should have in my file is this line that says import pandas. That tells Python, bring in the pandas library. I want to use data frames. I want to use all the capabilities that pandas has. Bring this into my file. Next, I'm going to create a variable, and I'll call it smoking data. And I will set this variable equal to the result of calling the pandas.readCSV function. So I will type in smoking data equals pandas.read_CSV. And then inside the brackets, I will give the file name in single quotes. In this case, it is table1 underscore smoking versus cancer.csv. I'll go on to a new line. That's a personal style of mine. And I'm going to hit run. On Windows, it is the F5 key. You can also use the big green play button up here to run the entire file. Now I've read my CSV file into Python. We just read in this CSV by using a function called readCSV. But some of you might be wondering, what the heck is a function? Well, a function is a named set of instructions that does something for us, that performs a task. It allows us to reuse blocks of code without having to copy them and paste them into our code over and over again. What we just did was read in a CSV file by calling the read_CSV function. So we call functions, and we can pass those functions parameters. One way to think about functions and parameters is if you have a microwave at home and you type in the time 1 minute and 30 seconds to reheat your dinner. That's an example of a parameter. You're giving the reheat function the 1 minute 30 seconds as the time parameter. The readCSV function we just used returns a value, a data frame. We can store these in variables. Not every function will return values, but most do. For example, we can call a built-in function called the print function and pass in the string that we want to display as a parameter. Let's check that out right now. We'll just print out the string hello world to the console just for fun. I'll come back into my Python environment, and on line 5, I'm going to add in the code print. I'll open brackets because I'll be calling a function, and I'll pass in the string hello world. Come outside the brackets. I'm going to hit F5 to run this code, and keep an eye on the lower right-hand side of my screen, and you'll see the string hello world printed out to the screen. As a programmer, I like to strive for efficiency. We're going to be using pandas a lot in this course. And after a while, reading in data frames or using functions that are built into the pandas library, we'll have to type the word pandas over and over again. We can save ourselves the effort of typing out pandas by providing an alias when we import pandas. Then, instead of using pandas.readCSV, we can use that alias. I like to use the alias PD. Notice how I've changed my import pandas to import pandas as PD. And now I can call readCSV by saying pd.read_CSV. Let's go back to our code and update it quickly. I'll come back up here to where I say import pandas, and I'll say import pandas as PD. And then I will update line 3 to read smoking data equals pd.readCSV. And for now, I'll take out that print statement we added earlier. And if I hit the F5 key, everything runs just like it did before. Only now we have this alias to save ourselves typing out pandas. One question you may be asking yourself is, how did Python know where to find my file table 1 smoking versus cancer? It knew where to find that file because Python keeps track of something called a working directory. This tells Python where to look for your data files. By default, your working directory is the same folder your Python file is saved in. So generally, you want to save your Python file next to or in the same folder as your CSV files, your data files for your project. In this course, anytime we refer to a directory, we're talking about a folder. Directory is the technical name for folders. In the course of your work, you may run into an error that says no such file or directory, or file not found. If you run into an error like this, make sure that your Python file and your data file are stored next to each other. Also check that you've got the file name right. File names on Windows and Mac are case sensitive. You'll want to make sure that your file name is spelled correctly in your code. Just to demonstrate, I'll come back into Spider and I'll put a deliberate typo into my read CSV. I will leave off the trailing E on table. Now when I try to run the code, I get this error down here that says file not found error. This is my clue that either I have the casing of my file name incorrect or I've got the spelling of my file name incorrect. If I correct the spelling to be table1 _ smoking versus cancer.csv and run the file now, the file runs without issue. In the next video, we will conduct some data exploration using pandas and our data frames.